The PS1 era gave us some of the most memorable games ever created. These classics shaped gaming history with unforgettable worlds, characters, and gameplay. Here are some of the best PS1 games of all time. Dino Crisis 2 takes a much faster and more action-heavy approach compared to the first game. Instead of slowly walking through empty areas and saving every bullet, I was constantly running through swarms of dinosaurs while trying to survive intense fights. I really liked how fast the combat was, especially being able to move while shooting because it made every encounter more exciting. The combo system also pushed me to stay aggressive instead of hiding or playing too carefully. Regina and Dylan were both fun to use, and switching between them kept the adventure fresh. The dinosaur attacks, soundtrack, and dramatic camera angles make this game wild and memorable in a way that very few action games from that era managed to achieve. Tekken 3 is the kind of fighting game that kept making me want to play just one more match. The combat feels fast, smooth, and much more refined compared to the earlier games, especially with the sidestepping and better movement during fights. I also liked how many characters the game offered because almost everyone had their own style and personality. Jin, Hwoarang, Eddie, and Xiaoyu all brought something different, which made experimenting with the roster really fun. What surprised me most was how much extra content was included outside the normal arcade battles. Tekken Force and Tekken Ball added a lot of variety and made the game hard to put down. The music, visuals, and responsive controls still make every fight exciting to jump into. Crash Team Racing kept bringing me back because every track had so much energy and personality. I spent a lot of time learning how to chain boosts together, and once I understood the power sliding system, the races became much more exciting and competitive. I also liked how many things there were to unlock in adventure mode since it gave me a reason to keep replaying tracks. The weapons were chaotic without becoming annoying, and using missiles, TNT crates, or warp orbs at the right moment always made races more fun. The colorful tracks, catchy soundtrack, and smooth controls still make this game incredibly entertaining. Out of all the kart racers from that era, this is still the one I enjoy revisiting the most. Final Fantasy VII was the kind of RPG that made me lose track of time because there was always something new to discover. The world felt massive, and every area had its own atmosphere, story moments, and memorable characters that kept the adventure interesting. I spent a lot of time experimenting with materia setups and limit breaks since the combat gave me plenty of freedom to play the way I wanted. The story also hit much harder than I expected, especially during the emotional scenes involving Cloud and the rest of the party. The music, pre-rendered backgrounds, and cinematic presentation gave everything a huge sense of scale. After finishing it, I could easily understand why so many people still consider it one of the greatest RPGs ever made. Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone took up a huge amount of my time when I was younger, even though it was much simpler than most RPGs. Exploring Hogwarts, learning spells, and completing quests made the adventure fun enough that I kept replaying it for hours. I also liked finding secret passages and hidden collectibles around the castle because it made exploration more rewarding. The combat system was basic, but using different spells and collecting wizard cards still gave battles some variety. Moving around the school could be a little slow at times, especially with random enemy encounters constantly appearing, but I still enjoyed the atmosphere a lot. The music, simple visuals, and faithful recreation of Hogwarts gave the adventure a charm that stayed memorable long after I finished it. PaRappa the Rapper had such a strange and creative style that I couldn't stop smiling while playing it. The idea of solving problems through rap battles already sounded ridiculous, but the characters, music, and paper-like visuals gave everything so much personality. I still remember stages like learning Kung Fu with Master Onion, because the songs were catchy enough to stay stuck in my head long after playing. The rhythm gameplay can be frustrating sometimes since the timing feels awkward during certain parts, but the soundtrack and humor kept me going anyway. I also liked how every stage had its own unique theme instead of repeating the same ideas. The presentation, voice lines, and goofy energy gave this rhythm classic an identity that still feels memorable years later. Xenogears gave me a very different experience compared to most RPGs because the story focused so heavily on philosophy, mystery, and character struggles instead of simple good versus evil conflicts. I spent a lot of time trying to understand everything happening in the world since the game constantly introduced new questions and deeper layers to the story. The combat system also kept me interested because learning attack combinations and managing gear fuel made battles more engaging than standard turn-based fights. I really liked the mix of anime cutscenes, giant mech battles, and emotional character moments because it gave the adventure a unique atmosphere. Some visuals and animations have clearly aged, but the soundtrack, ambitious storytelling, and complex themes still make this RPG feel unforgettable long after finishing it. Crash Bandicoot gave me the kind of platforming challenge that constantly tested my timing and patience. I liked how the levels stayed focused instead of throwing me into huge open areas, which made every jump, trap, and enemy encounter feel more precise. The wild boar chase sections and bonus stages also added enough variety to stop the gameplay from becoming repetitive. Some jumps could definitely be frustrating, especially during tighter platforming sections, but the frequent checkpoints stopped those mistakes from becoming too annoying. I also enjoyed the colorful environments and goofy personality that Crash brought to the adventure because it gave the game a lot of charm. The fast-paced platforming, memorable music, and creative level design still make this one of the most enjoyable mascot platformers from that generation. Moto Racer 2 delivers a much faster and more exciting racing experience than I expected from a motorcycle game of that era. I liked switching between superbikes and motocross races because both styles handled differently and kept the gameplay feeling fresh. The sense of speed was excellent, especially during tighter races where every turn and jump could change your position instantly. I also spent a surprising amount of time messing around with the track editor, since creating custom tracks added a lot more replay value. Some crashes and collisions could feel frustrating because even small bumps slowed me down way too much, but the arcade-style racing stayed fun anyway. The large number of tracks, quick pacing, and energetic racing atmosphere made it really easy for me to keep coming back to it. Resident Evil 2 created a constant sense of tension because I never felt completely safe while exploring Raccoon City. Walking through dark hallways with limited ammo and healing items made every zombie encounter stressful, especially when stronger enemies started appearing later in the story. I liked how exploration, puzzle solving, and inventory management all worked together because it made progress feel rewarding instead of automatic. Leon and Claire also kept the story interesting with their different weapons and perspectives during the outbreak. The atmosphere was probably my favorite part though, since the sound design, creepy environments, and sudden enemy encounters constantly kept me on edge. Between the horror, action, and exploration, this became one of the survival horror experiences I remembered long after finishing it. Crash Bandicoot 3 added so many new ideas that it constantly felt fresh while I was playing it. Traveling through different time periods, fighting dinosaurs, flying planes, racing vehicles, and exploring underwater sections gave every set of levels its own personality. I also liked unlocking new abilities after boss fights, because moves like the double jump and bazooka made platforming much more satisfying later in the adventure. The controls felt smoother compared to the earlier games, and the extra movement options made some of the harder stages less frustrating. I spent a lot of time trying to collect gems and replaying levels to unlock secrets, especially during the tougher time trials. The creative level variety, colorful visuals, and fast-paced platforming made this the Crash game I enjoyed the most. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 had the kind of gameplay that made me want to keep retrying levels just to land better combos and beat my previous scores. Learning manuals and linking tricks together made every successful run much more satisfying once I understood the flow of the controls. I also liked how much content was packed into the game, especially the hidden areas, unlockable characters, career objectives, and the park editor. Each level had enough secrets and challenges to keep me replaying them for a long time. The soundtrack added a lot of energy to every session, and the controls were simple enough to learn without losing the depth needed for bigger tricks. This easily became one of the most addictive sports games I played from that era. Vigilante 8 made vehicular combat feel chaotic in the best possible way because every match quickly turned into complete destruction. I liked trying out the different cars since each one handled differently and came with its own ridiculous special weapon. The bee swarm attacks, missiles, and giant explosions made battles entertaining even when things became messy on screen. The controls were also easy to handle, which made fast fights and sharp turns more enjoyable during intense matches. I spent most of my time playing the multiplayer because battling another player created non-stop chaos and hilarious moments. The single-player missions were short, but the destructive weapons, explosive action, and fast gameplay still made this a really memorable vehicle combat experience from that era. Ape Escape had such a fun and creative idea that I instantly enjoyed running around with gadgets while trying to capture monkeys across different levels. Using nets, slingshots, and other tools made the platforming feel more interactive compared to other games from that time. I also liked how every monkey had its own goofy personality because it made chasing them around much more entertaining. The controls felt unique as well since the game made great use of both analog sticks, which felt fresh back then. Some stages could become frustrating when enemies started attacking from every direction, but the gadget variety and playful level design kept me interested. The colorful worlds, silly humor, and monkey-catching gameplay gave this platformer a style that still feels memorable years later. Metal Gear Solid completely changed how I looked at cinematic storytelling in games because nothing else at the time felt this ambitious. Sneaking through Shadow Moses while avoiding guards, cameras, and traps made every area tense even before the action sequences started. I also loved how memorable the boss fights were, since each one felt unique instead of repeating the same ideas. The voice acting, soundtrack, and long cutscenes made the adventure feel closer to an action movie than a normal game. Some controls and menu management can feel clunky now, especially during intense fights, but the atmosphere and storytelling still carry the experience. Between the stealth gameplay, unforgettable characters, and dramatic presentation, this remains one of the most influential action games I played from that generation. Street Fighter Collection brought back a lot of classic arcade memories because the gameplay still felt fast and satisfying. I spent most of my time jumping between Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo and Street Fighter Alpha 2 Gold, since both games had strong rosters and responsive combat. Pulling off combos, fireballs, and super moves still felt rewarding, especially during close matches against friends. I also liked seeing the original animations and stages preserved because it kept the arcade atmosphere intact. The biggest disappointment was how incomplete the package felt since several older Street Fighter versions were missing entirely. Even with that issue, the tight controls, iconic characters, and addictive fighting mechanics still made this collection easy to revisit whenever I wanted classic arcade action. Disney's Tarzan had the kind of fast platforming and colorful presentation that instantly reminded me of classic side-scrolling adventures. Swinging across vines, tree surfing, swimming, and escaping dangerous animals kept the gameplay constantly changing from level to level. I also liked how closely the stages followed the movie because it made the adventure feel much more cinematic and familiar. The controls were smooth, which made jumping and moving through the jungle satisfying even during tougher sections. The biggest issue was how short the adventure was since I finished it much faster than I expected. The animated visuals, fun level variety, and energetic soundtrack made this platformer really entertaining whenever I wanted a simple and enjoyable platforming experience. Dragon Ball GT Final Bout mainly appealed to me because seeing Dragon Ball characters fighting in 3D looked exciting at the time. Launching giant beam attacks across the screen and watching energy clashes during battles looked especially cool for fans of the anime. I also liked hearing familiar voices and seeing characters stay visually close to the series. The biggest problem was that the fighting mechanics became repetitive very quickly since most characters shared similar moves and the combat lacked depth. Movement also felt awkward during fights, especially when characters floated in midair without much impact behind attacks. Even with those flaws, the flashy, special moves and fan service moments made this entertaining enough for me to revisit occasionally as a casual Dragon Ball fighting game. Duke Nukem Time to Kill was a surprisingly fun change for the series because it mixed platforming, exploration, and shooting into one adventure. Running through levels, climbing ledges, solving simple puzzles, and blasting aliens with ridiculous weapons kept the gameplay entertaining. I also liked how the camera worked better than many similar games, since it made exploring areas much less frustrating. The combat had plenty of action too, especially with classic Duke weapons like rocket launchers and pipe bombs returning. The biggest issue was that the game felt too easy and much shorter than I expected, especially during boss fights. Even with that problem, the mix of action, humor, and exploration made this an enjoyable spin-off compared to many other action games from that era. Castlevania Symphony of the Night completely changed my expectations for side-scrolling action games because the castle felt huge and packed with secrets. I loved exploring new areas, unlocking abilities, and returning to older sections to discover hidden paths that were impossible to reach earlier. The RPG mechanics also made progression rewarding since leveling up, collecting weapons, and finding rare gear constantly encouraged exploration. Playing as Alucard instead of a Belmont gave combat a fresh feel too, especially with the variety of swords, spells, and transformations available during battles. The gothic atmosphere was my favorite part, thanks to the soundtrack, detailed backgrounds, and creepy enemy designs. The exploration, music, and satisfying progression made this one of the best action platformers I experienced from that generation. Spider-Man made swinging through the city so fun that I spent hours exploring Manhattan even when I ignored story missions completely. Moving between skyscrapers with web swinging felt smooth and satisfying, especially because the movement had real momentum behind it instead of feeling automatic. I also liked how much detail was packed into the city since every district looked alive with traffic, lights, and random crimes happening around me. The combat stayed entertaining too, thanks to the fast movement, gadgets, and aerial combos during fights. What surprised me most was how emotional the story became later in the adventure, because the characters and relationships felt more developed than I expected. The movement, cinematic presentation, and open-world design made this one of the most immersive superhero experiences I played. Gran Turismo 2 was the racing game that made me appreciate realistic driving mechanics instead of simple arcade racing. I spent hours earning licenses, saving money for upgrades, and testing different cars because every vehicle handled differently on the track. I also liked how massive the car selection felt since there were hundreds of vehicles and many manufacturers to choose from. The races demanded patience and precision, especially during tighter corners where braking too late could ruin an entire lap. The off-road rally races added some nice variety too, even if they were not as polished as the main road events. Between the detailed cars, realistic handling, and huge amount of content, this became one of the deepest racing experiences I played from that era. Medal of Honor created a more grounded and serious atmosphere compared to many other shooters I played at the time. The campaign kept me interested with its mix of large firefights, stealth sections, and intense rescue missions that constantly changed the pacing. I also liked how the battlefield chatter between soldiers added personality and made missions feel more believable during combat. The shooting mechanics were solid, especially during close-range firefights where quick reactions mattered a lot. Some enemy behavior and invisible walls could become frustrating because they made certain missions feel too scripted, but the action stayed exciting anyway. The sound design, realistic weapons, and intense multiplayer matches made this shooter feel much more immersive than many other military games released during that era. Spyro 2 Ripto's Rage made exploration feel rewarding because every world introduced new characters, mini-games, and hidden collectibles to discover. I liked how each level had its own theme and unique objectives, instead of repeating the same platforming ideas over and over. Flying, charging enemies, solving small puzzles, and unlocking abilities kept the adventure feeling fresh throughout most of the game. The colorful worlds and cheerful music also gave everything a really fun atmosphere that was difficult for me to stop playing. Some orb challenges and camera controls could definitely become frustrating, especially during tougher minigames later in the adventure. The creative level design, variety of activities, and charming presentation made this one of the mascot platformers I enjoyed revisiting the most. Final Fantasy IX had a much lighter and more charming atmosphere than many other RPGs I played from that era. I enjoyed traveling through its fantasy world because every town, character, and location had personality and a strong sense of adventure. The story stayed emotional without becoming overly complicated, and characters like Vivi ended up being far more memorable than I expected. I also liked how simple and satisfying the progression system felt, since every character had clear strengths without confusing mechanics, slowing things down. The active time events were another great addition because they gave extra personality to the cast during quieter moments. The music, colorful world design, and heartfelt storytelling made this one of the most enjoyable RPG adventures I experienced from that generation. Metal Slug X delivered non-stop action from the moment I started playing because explosions, enemies, and chaos constantly filled the screen. I liked how the gameplay stayed simple while still feeling exciting thanks to the huge variety of weapons, vehicles, and enemy types packed into every mission. The hand-drawn visuals were incredible since almost every animation had funny little details that made the world feel alive. I spent a lot of time replaying stages just to discover hidden prisoners, secret items, and alternate paths I missed earlier. Some vehicle controls could feel awkward during intense fights, but the fast pacing kept everything entertaining. The soundtrack, creative level design, and non-stop arcade action made this one of the most enjoyable side-scrolling shooters I played from that era. Syphon Filter mixed stealth and action in a way that kept missions tense without slowing the pace too much. Sneaking through levels, taking careful headshots, and using different weapons made missions feel different from the last one. I also liked how varied the objectives were since the game constantly switched between stealth sections, bomb defusal missions, and heavy firefights. The controls took some time to get used to, especially when Gabe moved too quickly in tighter areas, but the combat stayed satisfying once I adjusted. The taser was probably the most memorable weapon because of how ridiculous and over-the-top it looked during fights. The soundtrack, mission variety, and cinematic spy thriller atmosphere made this one of the most entertaining action games I played from that generation. Jackie Chan's Stuntmaster had a fighting style that perfectly matched the energy of Jackie Chan movies with fast punches, kicks, counters, and environmental attacks. I liked how combat encouraged movement because enemies constantly surrounded me during fights, forcing me to stay aggressive and avoid getting trapped. Smashing objects, performing wall jumps, and pulling off longer combos made the action entertaining throughout most of the adventure. The voice lines also added personality since Jackie reacted to situations with funny comments during levels. The platforming sections were definitely the weakest part because mistimed jumps could become frustrating, especially with long reloads after falling. The colorful environments, martial arts combat, and arcade-style action still made this one of the more enjoyable beat-em-up games I played from that era. Rayman 2: The Great Escape had a sense of adventure that made every new area exciting to explore. I liked how the game constantly introduced different mechanics like gliding, riding rockets, swinging across gaps, and solving environmental puzzles instead of repeating the same platforming ideas. The fantasy world also had a unique atmosphere because the colorful environments, strange creatures, and music made every location feel memorable. Combat stayed simple, but using energy blasts while dodging enemy attacks kept fights entertaining throughout the journey. Some camera angles could occasionally become awkward during platforming sections, especially near tighter jumps and moving platforms. The creative level design, smooth movement, and imaginative world made this one of the most enjoyable 3D platformers I played from that generation. Tomb Raider made exploration and survival feel much more intense because every area seemed full of danger, traps, and collapsing environments. I liked how the adventure mixed climbing, puzzle solving, shooting, and platforming together because it kept the pacing constantly changing. Lara also felt more vulnerable compared to older action heroes, which made dangerous moments and enemy encounters more tense during the story. Upgrading weapons and scavenging materials gave exploration more purpose too, especially when unlocking better equipment for later sections. Some quick-time events and scripted sequences could feel a bit excessive, but the action scenes were exciting enough that I stayed invested anyway. The cinematic presentation, strong atmosphere, and satisfying exploration made this one of the most memorable adventure games I played from that generation. Resident Evil 3 created constant pressure because Nemesis could appear at almost any moment and completely ruin my plans. Exploring Raccoon City while trying to manage ammo, healing items, and dangerous enemies made every section tense from start to finish. I also liked how much faster and more action-focused the gameplay felt compared to earlier survival horror games without losing the creepy atmosphere. The city itself looked memorable too, especially with destroyed streets, burning buildings, and abandoned locations scattered throughout the adventure. Some parts of the story moved a little too quickly, but the pacing kept the action exciting. The intense chases, horror atmosphere, and satisfying combat made this one of the most thrilling survival horror games I played from that generation. Final Fantasy Tactics had one of the deepest strategy systems I experienced because every battle rewarded careful planning instead of rushing forward carelessly. I spent a lot of time experimenting with different job classes, abilities, and team combinations since the customization options felt endless. The story also stayed surprisingly serious and political, which made the conflicts between characters much more interesting than I expected from a tactical RPG. I especially liked how battles could completely change depending on positioning, terrain, and the abilities I equipped before a fight. Some encounters became brutally difficult if I was unprepared, but overcoming them made victories far more satisfying afterward. The strategic combat, memorable cast, and incredible customization made this one of the best tactical RPGs I played from that generation. Crash Bandicoot 2 Cortex Strikes Back improved a lot from the first adventure because the levels felt more balanced and consistently fun to play through. I liked how every warp room introduced different environments and mechanics, which kept the platforming fresh without becoming confusing. Collecting gems also became rewarding since many secrets required careful exploration and smarter platforming instead of simply reaching the end of a stage. The movement felt tighter during normal platforming sections too, especially while spinning through enemies and jumping across dangerous gaps. Some vehicle stages and chase sequences could become frustrating because the controls were not always reliable during tougher moments. The colorful levels, creative secrets, and addictive platforming made this one of the mascot platformers I revisited most from that generation. Mega Man X4 had some of the fastest and most satisfying action platforming I experienced from that era. I liked that the adventure could be played as either X or Zero because both characters completely changed how combat and progression worked. Playing as X focused more on ranged attacks and upgrades, while Zero pushed me toward aggressive close-range combat with sword techniques and combos. The level design also stayed interesting since every stage introduced different hazards, enemies, and hidden secrets to uncover. Boss fights were easily the biggest challenge because many of them demanded patience, quick reactions, and learning attack patterns through repeated attempts. The smooth controls, energetic soundtrack, and challenging gameplay made this one of the most memorable action platformers I played from that generation. Pepsiman looked completely ridiculous at first, but after playing it for a while I realized how addictive the gameplay actually was. Running forward through busy streets while dodging obstacles, jumping over hazards, and reacting quickly kept every stage fast and chaotic. I also liked how simple the controls were, because the challenge came entirely from timing and memorizing stages instead of complicated mechanics. The presentation was obviously low budget, especially with the rough graphics and strange live-action scenes between levels, but that weirdness became part of the charm. Some sections were difficult since one mistake could quickly ruin an entire run, though the gameplay always made me want another attempt. The The non-stop pacing and hilarious concept made this one of the strangest arcade experiences I played from that era. Silent Hill created a kind of psychological horror that stayed with me long after I stopped playing. Walking through fog-covered streets with only a flashlight and a radio warning me about nearby monsters made exploration constantly tense and uncomfortable. I also liked how the atmosphere relied more on disturbing environments, strange sounds, and unsettling imagery instead of non-stop action or cheap jump scares. The monster designs were genuinely creepy too, especially because many of them looked unnatural and moved in disturbing ways. Some camera angles and story details could become confusing, particularly near the ending where certain plot points were not explained clearly enough. The haunting soundtrack, oppressive atmosphere, and terrifying world design made this one of the most unforgettable horror games I played from that generation. Bugs Bunny Lost in Time captured the humor of classic Looney Tunes cartoons better than I expected from a platformer. Traveling through different time periods kept the adventure entertaining because every world introduced new puzzles, enemies, and cartoon-style situations to deal with. I also liked how levels were unlocked gradually, since collecting clocks and golden carrots gave exploration more purpose than simply reaching the end of a stage. The voice acting and animations added personality too, especially during funny encounters with characters like Elmer Fudd and Yosemite Sam. Some hidden collectibles and camera angles could become frustrating during tougher platforming sections, but the creative level design stayed entertaining. The humor, varied worlds, and puzzle-focused gameplay made this one of the most charming platformers I played from that era. Legacy of Kain's Soul Reaver created a dark and unsettling atmosphere that immediately pulled me into its ruined world. Exploring Nosgoth felt rewarding because every area contained strange enemies, hidden paths, and disturbing environmental details that added personality to the adventure. I also liked switching between the physical and spectral realms, since puzzles and navigation constantly changed depending on where I traveled. Raziel gained useful abilities throughout the story, which made backtracking and discovering secrets much more satisfying later in the game. Some navigation sections became confusing because the world was large and easy to get lost inside. The haunting soundtrack, strong voice acting, and imaginative world design made this one of the most memorable action-adventure games I played on PlayStation. Ridge Racer Type 4 had an incredible arcade racing style that felt smooth, stylish, and fast from the very first race. Drifting around corners at high speed became satisfying once I learned how to control the cars properly during tighter turns. I also loved the atmosphere because every track had its own mood, music, lighting, and scenery that made races feel memorable. The soundtrack played a huge role too, since the electronic music perfectly matched the late-night city environments and fast pacing of the races. Some rival drivers could become frustrating because the aggressive AI constantly blocked overtakes and pushed me into walls during close races. The stylish presentation, responsive controls, and addictive drifting made this one of the best arcade racing games I played on PlayStation. Donald Duck Goin' Quackers delivered a fun mix of platforming styles that kept the adventure entertaining from beginning to end. I liked how levels constantly switched perspectives between side-scrolling sections, behind-the-back platforming, and fast chase sequences because it stopped the gameplay from becoming repetitive. Donald also controlled well during jumps and attacks, especially once I learned how to chain enemy bounces together across levels. The cartoon presentation added a lot of charm too, since the animations, voice acting, and colorful environments captured the Disney style really well. Some jumps could become frustrating because the camera angles occasionally made judging distance harder than it should have been. The humor, varied level design, and energetic platforming made this one of the more enjoyable Disney games I played on PlayStation. Vagrant Story created one of the darkest and most atmospheric worlds I explored on the PlayStation. Walking through the ruined city of Leomond felt haunting because the environments, music, and quiet storytelling constantly built tension during the adventure. I also liked how different the combat system felt compared to traditional RPGs, since targeting enemy body parts and chaining attacks added strategy to battles. The story stayed serious and complex throughout, which made the characters and political conflicts more interesting than I expected at first. Some mechanics definitely took time to understand because the crafting systems, menus, and battle options could feel overwhelming early on. The incredible atmosphere, challenging gameplay, and mature storytelling made this one of the most unique RPG experiences I played from that era. MediEvil mixed dark fantasy with goofy humor in a way that made the adventure feel charming and memorable from the beginning. Playing as Sir Daniel Fortesque was entertaining because the story constantly reminded me that he was an unlikely hero trying to redeem himself. I also liked exploring the creepy graveyards, haunted villages, and strange fantasy locations since every level had its own atmosphere and enemies. The combat stayed simple but satisfying too, especially when unlocking stronger weapons and fighting large groups of monsters. Some platforming sections and boss fights could become frustrating because the controls and camera were not always reliable during difficult moments. The gothic presentation, memorable humor, and unique world design made this one of the most distinctive action-adventure games I played on PlayStation. Dino Crisis mixed survival horror with dinosaurs in a way that made the adventure feel far more tense than I expected. Running through research facilities while dangerous raptors chased me between rooms created constant pressure during exploration and puzzle solving. I also liked how the dinosaurs behaved more aggressively than typical horror enemies because they moved quickly and could suddenly appear in areas I thought were safe. Resource management stayed important too, since wasting ammunition often caused bigger problems during later sections of the story. Some puzzles and backtracking sequences became frustrating because progression occasionally relied too heavily on finding key cards and solving repetitive objectives. The tense atmosphere, dangerous enemies, and survival horror gameplay made this one of the most memorable dinosaur games I played on PlayStation. Bugs Bunny and Taz Time Busters combined platforming, puzzles, and mini-games in a way that kept the adventure entertaining from beginning to end. I liked switching between Bugs and Taz because both characters had unique abilities that were needed to solve puzzles and reach hidden locations. Traveling through different time periods also helped the game stay fresh, since every world introduced new enemies, environments, and gameplay ideas. The cartoon presentation captured the Looney Tunes style really well too, especially through the animations, funny cutscenes, and character designs. Some sections became a little too easy, particularly during simpler puzzles and repetitive boss encounters later in the story. The cooperative gameplay, creative worlds, and humorous atmosphere made this one of the most enjoyable cartoon platformers I played on PlayStation. Oddworld Abe's Odyssey combined cinematic platforming and puzzle solving in a way that felt completely different from most PlayStation games I played. Guiding Abe through dangerous factories and strange alien environments required patience because every movement and jump needed careful timing. I also liked how rescuing Mudokons added more tension since saving everyone demanded exploration, puzzle solving, and avoiding deadly traps throughout the adventure. The world itself felt incredibly unique too, especially with the strange creatures, dark humor, and atmospheric backgrounds found in every area. Some checkpoints could become frustrating because one small mistake often forced me to repeat difficult sections all over again. The memorable world design, clever puzzles, and creative gameplay mechanics made this one of the most unique platforming adventures I played on PlayStation. One Piece Grand Battle captured the colorful anime style really well and made the characters look almost identical to the show. I liked seeing the Straw Hat crew and their enemies fighting inside interactive arenas because the visuals and special attacks felt energetic and over the top. The cel-shaded graphics also helped the game stand out since the animations looked smooth and matched the humor of the series. Some multiplayer matches could become entertaining with friends, especially when using flashy special attacks during chaotic fights. The biggest problem was the combat system, because most characters felt too similar and powerful. Attacks quickly removed strategy from battles. The strong presentation, recognizable characters, and flashy visuals made this a fun anime fighter for fans despite its repetitive gameplay.